Incident response is the human behavior that results in system stability when things don't go as planned. The Site Reliability Engineering, or SRE model, is introduced. You've actually been learning best practices throughout this course that relate directly to the layers of the SRE model. By developing your design with reliability in mind, you've established processes for operating, maintaining, and recovering the system in the event that things start to go sideways. In this lesson, you'll review the items that were discussed in detail earlier in the class to prepare for successful incident response. And it will discuss a few final steps, such as developing playbooks to implement the response strategy.
So we've set up alerts, we're doing dashboards, and now we've got health checks. So how do we respond to an incident? So here's where we do a little salt and pepper and talk about our SRE processes. And in this case here, it's about user trust, and it depends on how well we respond to incidences. So to do so, we need to be consistent. We need to be able to minimize these outages. We need to be transparent about what we've done and what we've identified, and we have to respond and learn quickly from this. Users are very vigilant and they're flexible, as long as you're not repeating some of the same mistakes and you're communicative. People do realize at the end of the day, we're all human. And so that is something that you really do not want to lose by simply hiding and being fearful of actually being transparent with what's going on. So to do so, and to do so in a repetitive method, we want to create a structured incident response. So we have to be prepared. So we have to respond as quick as possible, and we have to know what to do ahead of time. Very good luck trying to do this when you're in the middle of the incident, which is why we spend time during this design and process phase. So for our consistency, we need to reduce a duplication of effort. We need to ensure that only people know who is going to do what, that we don't have multiple occurrences going on, which could delay our response. So our SRE culture, it's all about collaboration and communication, learning, open and sharing of our designs, which is why what you'll see, Google pretty much publishes anything of value to the open source under research.google.com, many other blog posts and other best practices. So having a strict, like a business logic like we do for our app, having an organized flow of information and customer notifications. So knowing exactly what the steps are once we have identified the process and identifying what the communication is. And even if we haven't fully identified it, having the steps in place to say this is our first level communication, this is our conclusion once we're back up in line, and then follow up with a post-mortem. That's a typical kind of a three-step response. So what does this include? Well, it includes a monitoring dashboard. We have to have metrics to understand and at least draw some scope around what's been affected. We have to have an alerting regimen. How are we going to notify customers, people on call, etc.? And none of that can happen without the plans and tools for responding to the issue. Maybe we have automated deployments that can recreate the environment to failover for DR. Perhaps we have automated rollback mechanisms, etc. So we have some method we've prepared for these situations ahead of time. Well, when we take a look at incident response, that really kind of culminates all the modules that you've learned so far. And that's the entire pyramid, from monitoring to incident response, which is where we maintain our user trust. Our business logic layer is where we start to work through our root cause analysis. Remember how we work through the plan in our mind to understand what caused this. And then we develop testing and release procedures to ensure that we have resiliency. When we deploy to production, we're going to implement some of the key things that we took away from the post-mortem. Now, of course, with these release procedures, we're going to be able to use this for forecast and capacity planning. So now we can design in the future, we can budget, and we can modify our development. So this way we can update our business logic layer like what we've been doing. Our photo service started as one box, and now it's a complicated list of different microservices and network components and security. And all of this came through kind of going through this vertical procedure all the way to potentially even changing the product itself. But maybe we didn't need to. There were very few changes. Most of it was typically around logging. We had to change some reading from the local file system to APIs to actually call from Google Cloud Storage. And so a lot of this actually was very little product change. Most of it came from just understanding a strict procedure to kind of handle the scalability and take advantage of the native Google Cloud services. So let's go ahead and review. We're not going to go through each one of these, but these are the list of processes that we've covered throughout the entire class. So some of them, they come from costly mistakes and understanding and production issues, but of course now you have a methodological way to kind of work through in your mind how you might take advantage of these before they even occur. So this is pretty cool because this gets you started, and a lot of this can be mocked up before you ever really go into production, because perhaps you'll be lucky enough someday to be the next Pokemon Go, which grew from 0 users users to the number of Twitter users in 72 hours. Now that happened because of a lot of pre-processed planning. In fact, if you type in this would be a great example of SRE in process. If you type in GCP podcast and Pokemon Go, they'll talk about how did they scale so quickly? How did they work with the deployment team, with the capacity planning team at Google to try to handle this? And you can see all of these processes were iteratively done very quickly, and they completely blew the mark when they estimated what their production value was going to be. But because of the monitoring and the tools in place, they were quickly able to assess and identify exactly what they would need to scale to. And using managed services from Google, we were able to scale to accommodate their needs. So now at this point, there's just a few practical items left to cover, and these are going to be on the subject for incident response. So when you look at the 12-factor guidelines on an administration and management task, it should be a one-off process. Ideally, what we're trying to do is we want to segregate what the humans can do. We also want to segregate control plane functions from data plane functions. So creating things like out-of-bound management utilizing the serial console, isolating host using a bastion host and SSHing into that device which only has access to the machines themselves, creating private subnetworks. So segregating the business and user logic from what it takes to actually manage and troubleshooting it. Finally, building a playbook. You need to have the playbook. The Book of Spells, I think this is an awesome looking book. In fact, I'd love to have the book even if there was nothing in it. But in this case here, what we want to do is we need to have a very strict guidelines. What's going to happen if we alert? We have to understand the severity. We have to be able to verify the problem is still ongoing. You know, the random problems are the worst ones to deal with. Having a process for diagnosing and how to fix the problem, right? Are we going to do short-term versus long-term? Maybe a long-term solution is going to be to update our service code. But immediate mitigation may be to do a restart the service. That's it. We may have to just deal with that until we've identified that, you know, we're going to have to do a code deployment. But then that's going to have to define what our deployment process will be like. And then finally, post-fix, right? Do a post-fix cleanup and understand, you know, be able to create that post-mortem so you can escalate to other teams. This is also key. This is why documentation. When I started at an ISP myself, it was just me, and I was responsible for everything. Eventually, we hired more employees, but it was still me up at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 a.m. in the morning. I had to stay as exhausted as I was to get our services back online because there's nobody to escalate to. But imagine, though, if I was going through this and I didn't document it and I just handed it off because I had to go get some sleep. Well, if there was no documentation, then that person would have to start over from scratch. So definitely recommend, even as painful and unenjoyable as it may be, it's definitely a process that you should really integrate as part of your troubleshooting and your management of your applications. So another one, create easy buttons, right? Use microservices with RESTful APIs. This way, you don't have to really understand what's going on inside those processes. You can communicate and rely on these externally. You can use Google Cloud APIs. A lot of these are very well baked and tested by Google. So why reinvent the wheel when we do have something available to you? Draining a service for maintenance, we can do this built into our load balancers, which will provide connection draining so we can be as undisruptive to our users as possible, and then utilizing scaling. So being able to pause scaling and shut down servers independently. So this way, if we need to take things, we like to put them in sick bay for kind of isolated testing from production. Also, balance interrupt-driven work and project-driven work. A lot of people, we think we're firefighters. In fact, that's our job. We show up and say, hey, what's the problem today? Why don't we like Mondays? Because we have to deal with all the junk that happened over on the weekend. And so this is very difficult because it prevents us from being project-driven. So when you're creating on-call rotation, these are very interruptive type of events. So you want to make sure that you nominate one person and then you rotate through this. Sometimes you need to do what we like to call customer empathy sessions. I've worked at companies in which the production development team actually had to rotate for 6 months to support active production, and they were on call. So they got to understand they can't throw garbage code over the fence, deploy into production, and then another team is responsible for it. And then, of course, reduce noise. Don't be calling humans if you're just going to be alerting about every little thing. You want to do the white box monitoring to send alerts to kind of trigger additional levels of detail and investigation. And try to reduce low value work. This is something that's very important. Try to automate wherever you can. I've found in many companies, no matter how fast we're growing, there's just so much tedious little process that kind of gets in the way of what's fun and what drives us to get up in the morning. And so this is something you should really think about as early on as possible. How can we automate this and reduce that low value work that really brings very little satisfaction to the job?
This module covered deploying, operating, and maintaining your design. Much of the groundwork needed for successful deployment, monitoring, and incident response was established earlier in the course in the context of the design process. This module points out how to integrate all those elements together to promote the behaviors that will lead to a stable service.